Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the AuctionChatter podcast and another episode of AuctionChatter. Here we've done a bunch recently, we're getting another one here. This episode of AuctionChatter, we're going to be discussing the new catalog by Taj Art, Auction 15. It's actually a two-part sale. Both will take place Monday, November 25th. And I think the first one is starting at 11:30, the next one at 12:45 Eastern Time. And they are selling the first part, the first catalog, I think it's 65 lots, is Judaica, silver and Judaic and the like. And the part that we're going to focus on is part 2, which is that's starting from lot 65. And that is letters, books, Sfarim, manuscripts, and so on. So again, if you're interested in the Judaica, check out that. We're not going to just focus on that, but you should check that out on BidSpirit. There'll be a link in the show's notes. And as always with these, this episode is sponsored by Taj Art, by the auction house. Thank them for that. And again, there'll be links and information in the show's notes. And as we've been doing recently, we'll run through items, what jumped out at us, what's interesting. We'll mention some other ones just to mention them, and you can check it out. So, and as always, I don't know if I mentioned, I'm joined by Ramesh Maimon. Thank you very much for joining me once again.
Thank you very much, Nachi. Great to be here again, and this is a wonderful auction. The 200 lots or so that we're going to focus on have a lot of Jewish history in them, a wide array of Sfarim. There is a strong focus here on this collection. Has a lot of Amsterdam 1700s, which were very well preserved, a lot of original bindings, very excellent specimens, and again, very interesting. A lot of Sfarim that had never seen in auction before, things that I myself had to learn about as we going through the catalog. So it's really we hope this is a learning experience for everybody.
Okay, and as with all of them, really, I often say this, I think I said this on the podcast, but definitely in private conversation, that Sfarim is one thing that it always humbles you. You always learn about new things. There's always new Gedolim, Mechabrim, new Sfarim, learn about new additions. So going through this, being given this opportunity, the auction house is sponsored and doing this, I very much enjoy it. I hope the listeners do as well, because it's the opportunity to learn about other things, which makes it very interesting. So we'll run through the auctions again, the lots. I will mention, the ones that really jump out to us. I mean, interestingly, just lots 65 and 66 are, as they call it, treasures from Baron Rothschild. There's a Machzer from one of them, that's lot 65. Lot 67 is the Baroness Rothschild book. Those are, interesting. But we'll start, as Ramesh said, there's a lot of items from the Amsterdam and maybe the collection. Someone was interested also in the Spanish-Portuguese community, because really both. Lot 68, there's a portrait of Moshe Gomez de Mesquita, if I'm pronouncing it right, London, 1752. So for those familiar, London actually was home to a Spanish-Portuguese community, really, America as well. New Amsterdam, which became New York, and really this started in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and then it was in Hamburg and London, etc. Actually, one of the later lots here, maybe we'll just mention it a little bit, that we've discussed in the past, is Matedon, the Kuzri Sheni, Reb David Nieto, who's also the Chacham in London, also Reb Yaakov Sasportes, was also for Tkufa, the Rav in London. So there's a portrait. And by the way, for most of these Rabbanim, for those that don't see the pictures, check it out, lot 68. The Rabbanim in London, the Spanish-Portuguese community, they look like you would expect an 18th century nobility to look. Whether they had a wig or a goatee, like a conical hat. They would have a pirate hat. You would that's how they look. That's how they dress. That's how everyone dresses. And that they definitely dress like that. You can see they have like a cape, so you can check out a picture of it.
Plus, they're wearing the clericals, like the white collar that members of the clergy wore. That was not specifically the Jewish clergy. It was also Christian clergymen wore that, and that kind of went out of practice. This is the 1700s when that was still fine. I believe there's a tshuva from Reb Chaim Ozer about it in the more modern communities where they tried bringing that back. And that became like somewhat of a hallmark of Reform Jewry. But in all the old pictures of these old Rabbanim, like Menashe ben Israel or whatever, that's 1600s, but even here in the 1700s, belonging to the same community, this was common.
Now you could contrast that with those in the same cultural milieu, like Reb Shaul of Amsterdam. So Reb Shaul of Amsterdam is lot 70, is one of the items. Lot 70 is a 3-part lot included in one. All items of Reb Shaul Amsterdam. And Reb Shaul Amsterdam, so with him, the picture is not like that. He looks more like your classic, it looks almost like a Streimel, fur hat and a regular beard. Looks more like your classic Rav that you would assume. Now he's comes from Eastern Europe. Reb Shaul Amsterdam, I think I'll mention the items in this lot are, this has ever been in Ariel, that we're going to discuss. Been in Ariel was published in 1778, Reb Shaul Amsterdam. It's 2 parts. It's on Chumash, and then it's on Shas and Lumdis. there's also, so that copy, the copy here on sale, there's a dedication indicating it belonged to him. There's also a copy of a Gemara, and it says Nidvas Admu Av Bezdin Varam Hagoyin Reb Shol Neiroi, so it came from him. And there's also, they have the engraving made in 1730. They say it's 1730 depicting him. Now, interestingly, to talk about a little bit about the Binin Ariel, one of the Gedolei Hadar, and we'll talk about what the Chidah says about him. I feel like he's not so well known today. So he came from a real miyuchistic family, and this is really something that happened in Europe. Anyone that knows really what was going on, generally there was the rabbinic elite, and they really intermarried, and they stayed intermarried, and they would, that's what you heard about yichus. This was like a big deal, and so Reb Shlomo Amsterdam was really the cream of the crop, if you will. His family, so his father was Rabbi Leib, who was the Av Bezdin in Amsterdam for a while. His shver was the Chacham Tzvi. So his mother was the Chacham Tzvi's daughter. And from his father's side also, I believe his great-grandfather was the Rebbe Reb Heschel from Krakow. So we're talking mega yichus here. Rebbe Reb Heschel was his great-grandfather. The Chacham Tzvi is his grandfather. His father is the Rav in Amsterdam. He, as a youth, he's I think in Dubno, he's in other places in Europe. Before he gets the job, he takes over his father by Leib in Amsterdam. Also, so he's also... His brother-in-law, who we'll talk about this a lot from in this auction, is Reb Shol, the Av Bezdin of The Hague in the Netherlands, a major Talmid Chacham, didn't have children, not so well known today. There's a lot in here we'll get to shortly. I'll mention what number it is where there's a hesped Give Us Shol, not to be confused with the Sefer Give Us Shol, Reb Shol Lev Merter of Amsterdam, but Give Us Shol hesped for Reb Shol of Hague. So that's his brother-in-law. His younger brother, is Tzvi Hirsch Berlin, the Rav of Berlin, also the father of the Besamim Rosh. So that's his... And
Besamim Rosh, that's Shol. He carries on the same name of the family.
Yeah, so that's him. So otherwise now known, infamy in some circles as Saul Berlin. He's also a mechutin with Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who's his uncle. So everybody, it's all, totally, everything is all, mixed together here, if you will, with Reb Shlomo Amsterdam. By the way, his son, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe, takes over the Shtel in Amsterdam after him. This is what to talk about there. I think there was some controversy at some point over there. So this is who we're dealing with. This is a who's who. When it comes to the Kliva Get, and with the Kliva Get, I always just say everyone should go listen to Shirley Bornstein's raid bite that he did, the great raid bite on Kliva Get. Alumnus, you can hear about the history. I mean, there's much more to talk about the Kliva Get, but Kliva Get, he was very much involved. Actually, in the new edition of Binin Ariel, beautiful 2-volume edition, there's a lengthy intro piece they put about the Kliva Get and his involvement in the Kliva Get. He was very involved in the Kliva Get. So Rab Shol printed this sefer. Binin Ariel is his sefer.
Before you get to that, Nachi, let me just jump in here. It's I think the Ned Yehuda is also related. I remember reading the Ned Yehuda was related as well. I don't remember exactly how, but he's part of that same rabbinic tree. And it's the 3 consecutive lots here. The Ned Yehuda is in 69 with a portrait, and then there's lot 70 with Reb Shol of Amsterdam, followed by lot 71 with Reb Shol of Hague.
That's the hesped.
Yeah, that's the hesped.
He didn't write it. Someone, Rabbi Yitzchak Turkheim, wrote that hesped and published it. There's some Yiddish in there, and that was the hesped that was written on
right. So if you're looking through the catalog, you'll see portraits of all 3 of them wearing very similar, like that same Streimel that you mentioned, which was apparently the Western European rabbinical hat, and it's fascinating to see that, and they all are connected, and these are the who's who of the rabbinic world in the mid to late 1700s in Western Europe.
So something to mention before, you're right, we should mention this before we get to the Binin Ariel itself and to talk about it a little bit. The Chidah, and of course we all know the Chidah, and everybody respects the Chidah. What the Chidah writes is so fascinating about that Kufa. So the Chidah traveled to Amsterdam in his Magal Tov, and he also talks about it in Shem HaGdolim, which is his bibliography. So in the Magal Tov, he said in Shnas Tov Kuf Lamed Ches in Amud 129 in the old one, he says Chav Teves B'Teves Ar Dalid. Halachti levaker hagoyin Reb Shol, ben hagoyin Reb Leib, ben hagoyin Reb Shol, ben hagoyin Agadol Reb Heschel, ben hagoyin Reb Yaakov. So he's giving you the yichus, like we said before. V'achi hagoyin hu hagoyin Reb Tzvi, Av Bezdin Berlin. So he gives you the yichus. He says v'heim bnei bas hagoyin Hagadol Maratz. The Chacham Tzvi, Ubas Hagoyin Reb Shol Hanisker v'Chasta v'Bonim, and he says the whole thing. He talks about. He says, "We call it Sodin Shalshelas Hayuchs." He says, "We said everybody, their mamish, the yichus over there is amazing," and he gives a whole thing what happened with him. It's just worth mentioning in Shem HaGdolim when he's talking about the Rebbe Reb Heschel and in Binin Ariel, the Chidah says, "V'ani Adal." I, the poor one, Zachisi, I was zeichel lekabel pnei Shechina, to be mekabel Shechina, b'shnas tov kuf lamed ches midei ovri b'shlichas mitzvah, v'zachisi lesbasim mitoyrasoi uman v'nasusoi v'shlei musoi rav chazda noked biyadei And he really gives the utmost praise, something he says for the Pnei Yeshua. This is what he says at Rav Shaul of Amsterdam. And later on, actually, in the same, in Magal Tov, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, he says, Bolu Vakar Gun Rav Shaul. Rav Shaul came to him, V'Shaul, and he asked, Eshlach Lai Birkei Yosef. I should send him a copy of my Sefer, Birkei Yosef. He says, V'Hayeli Mimenu Kavod Gadol. I was very v'chubed. Wow, Rav Shaul asked me for my Sefer, the Chida says. And actually, later on, the Chida also talks about, he gives a vivid description of he spent Purim by him, and he compares the students Achashverosh, and Haman, and Mordechai. Gives a whole very nice description there.
One more thing he mentions here in Shem Agdolim by the Rebbe of Herschel. There he talks also. He almost always when he mentions any one of these Gedolim, he'll mention the others in the same context. So he writes here, "V'Rabu k'may Rabu Rabbanim u'Goinim yotzei chalatz of the Rebbe of Herschel Kadosh Masher Ba'aretz Hachayim Hema v'Yibadlu Hachayim Rabbonei Goinei Hadar Nechtav u'Kroiv Yishmam Le'olam." There's referring to the two of the foremost Rabbanim, Reb Shaul and Reb Tzvi.
Right, and also Reb Shaul of Haig, who was related. So that's what the Chidah says Reb Shaul Amsterdam. So for those that don't know, if they're not familiar with Reb Shaul Amsterdam, the Binyan Ariel, again as stated, is on Chumash and it's on Lumdis. So interestingly, he starts off and he has an amazing Hakdama. So first of all, the two Askamas, Reb Shlomo Shalem, who the Chidah talks about extensively in there, who was the Rav in Belgrade, and he became the Rav in Amsterdam, and also Reb Shaul of Haig gives Haskama. But in the Reb Shaul Amsterdam has a very lengthy Haskama that's well worth reading, by the way, very enjoyable. One of these Hakdamas is a really historical Hakdama. And some of the things that he says, he lays out when he came to Amsterdam from Dublin, and he lays out his Mahalach Alimud and what they would go over there. And he says, first of all, he says, Anoichi b'derech nachani v'yavieni el hamokim as I came to this place, al beis Avi, his father's house, his father was there, matzasi boy es sha'av nafshi sfarim v'soifrim v'chachamim v'chuchamim v'nevoinim anshe chayil giboyrei koyach oisim el chamta shel Torah. Now, first of all, this is because Amsterdam was the printing place. This was in the 18th century. You printed a book in Amsterdam. So he comes there and he talks about what he would used to do. And he says he was established base medrash, and they would learn to Hiraz, Dinim, Velidrish, Jerusalem, L'chol Chavseim, Besmaneim, Umidei Shabbos, Beshabate, Kivoyo, Kama, B'nei Torah, V'chachamim, V'talmidim, L'hagir, Lem Chadash, B'mikro, Pirush Rashi, Midrash Zal. V'hela al Kolani, he says, Kviyas limit Sefer HaTurim u'Beis Yosef, B'chol Yoim, B'chevras Chachma Beis HaMedrash. They would go to the yeshiva, and they would learn Torah Beis Yosef. V'shar Chachamim, Shleim, Oivrim, V'shavim, he says, that's what they would learn. His father, Rabbi Leib, did this. That's what you should learn. He says this is what they would learn. He says, he would give a shir on this, in it, and he says, Zulasi says, except Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Asaknu, Pirush Rashi, Umadrashas, Beseder Aparsha, so he says he would learn every Erev Shabbos. We would learn Rashi and Medrash and the Parasha. That's what he would do. He says, so jumping around, he says, therefore he decided to print a sefer, to publish a sefer. So he says, first of all, just jumping ahead, he says, why do you call the sefer Binyan Ariel? Because he says it's his name and his father's name. His father's Aryeh Leib, so Ari, and his name is Ben Ari. He's Ben Aryeh Leib. He calls it actually such as Ben Ari, not Ben Aryeh Leib, but Mustama. That's why. He says it has his name and my name, and therefore he decided to do it. And he says he split it up. First, Ala Torah Megillas Amayadim. He called it Chazrei Torah Beis Moyed, and then he went to the other way. He says, why? Why do you put that first? He says, Ki oisai samti b'rishayin l'vishu Ala Torah shebeksav hakedemes. First is Torah shebeksav, then you go to Torah shebal V'gam hu al shav l'chol kakoten kagodel yitayil b'shabbos Amayadim. Everybody can sit and enjoy it. V'tilenu al shulchanai, take it to your table. Kul b'hu b'lashon movin al nakel b'li Torah. Very easy, simple, easy to read. He says, also, everybody today wants to read nice stuff on the Parsha and Yom Tif. He says, he says, he says, therefore he put that second. He says, it's amazing to read this, looking back today. He says, I hope that it should be a te'eles, people should use it. I'm confident. Everyone will like it. It's simple. Simple, you should read every Shabbos. And this is, you could read about what's going on in Amsterdam. You won't go al bate shirei agovim v'lefanes daitel l'tivrei sicha v'teila v'kalos roish ki tesanik nafshi b'divrei. You won't go around to other things. You'll sit and you'll learn and you'll learn this. And someone's going to ask, you say doesn't Bahari Kodesh. We have many great svarim. Maramal Sheikh, Ukliyakar, Velis Ephraim, which is Kliyakar, Vishla, Shala, Vishargoin Ulam, Kitkatam Ava Mimasni. Oh my, Shal of Amsterdam. Umay Yisrim Bichiburi said, what am I doing with this sefer? Shalai Hegile Flaugas Gedoilim Vichakri Levela. He says, Aval Darkan Shabbai Adam. This is great. This speaks to Rav Moshe's works at Ali Zayas. He works in this forum. He says, Aval Darkan Shabbai Adam. The way of people is, everyone gets rid of the old books. They want new books. Give me new stuff. What's new in this farm store? We go to Bigela's. What's new in the bookstore? Chazal say, the Duk me Yeshena and Akal Seif Naisai. Aval Duk me Chadash Akal Seif Naisai. Im Ken Akopanim says at the very least the Beis or Gimel Shonim Harishonis Lahadfis Sefer Azeh Yesh Beit Elis Harbe Lazakas Israel. The first few years I printed this book, at least people will use it because it's new and more. And sadly, I don't think people really use Binyan Ariel much anymore. I mean, it was beautifully redone by Nainical, and you can still get in the storm store, but it's not real. It's not really something that's used. Then he says, and continues, this is also amazing for anyone, was familiar with Yeshiva Mahalach, what goes on with Ilmaz Yeshiva Shatayra. This is really for them. He says, V'gam b'chelik hasheni, shu lefal shel pulpula ba'alma, it's pilpul, halayu toyev lechadir es ha-talmidim b'pilpul, nachin, u'mesukin ala seder, geschmack, to bring out, like lumdus, let's call it, ala seder, leman das seder iyan, to know the iyan, u'maso matan shalalacha. Val derech hazen, he says, this way, nisyastu b'kerev hashonim halolu, kama chiburam hilchas ha-Rambam sal. Many works written in Rambam, she'enam l'hayris halacha, they're not halacha, there's a lot of work. That those days, talking about Shar Melech. I mean, now we know many briskus for him, and Kiyaitzabay. You can learn them, and they're very enjoyable to come over. I also have people should learn this. They should enjoy my sefer, my lumdus, my pilpul, and take it. It should be a good gift for Hashem. V'ta'arif min chasi, zoy safnei hamakim, v'abriya shi'ul rotzen imri fi, u'me'es hamakim asher azarani, avakish rachamim. He gives us all Yasrani ligmur gam chilek hajrushim, asher boy musrim toivim, bekamri midrashes, etc., etc. He wanted to publish more. And that's really, really a wonderful, very fascinating Hakdama of the Binyan Ariel, Rav Shaul Amsterdam. And so this lot here, you have the picture of Rav Shaul, and you have two items owned by Rav Shaul. One his Gemara, and one a Binyan Ariel, his own copy.
Another important item in the end of the Binyan Ariel, the Chidah references this particularly in a few places. There's the the Noda B'Yehuda has his famous tshuva about shaving on Chol HaMoed in specific circumstances, and the Chidah points out how most of the other Rabbanim, he says, rejected that ruling, including the Binyan Ariel, who was a relative and a confidant, and of course close to the Noda B'Yehuda otherwise. But in the back of his Binyan Ariel, there's a tshuva there where he comes out on the opposite side of the coin from the Noda B'Yehuda. Let's move right along, Nachi. And
I do want to just jump in. One more thing about Lot 71, about Rav Shaul of Hague, that he didn't have descendants. He's buried in The Hague. I mean, now Amsterdam, unfortunately, in the news. And we just talked about how Amsterdam, Amsterdam was a Irvin Yisrael, a major city at the time. They were the biggest city. And so this interesting eulogy, this hesped, it does mention also, as they point out in the catalog, it does mention Philadelphia. As they translate here, it's possible for God to arrange it so that while it is morning in the East Indian city of Surat, to be evening in the American city of Philadelphia. They're mentioning Philadelphia. And remember, Amsterdam is, again, it was New Amsterdam, so the Dutch were very involved in the Americas. Yeah, Ramesh, back to you.
Including, of course, in Philadelphia. It's still an active synagogue, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in Philadelphia.
Mikveh Israel, yeah.
So that was like a sister community. Now I was going to move right along here to Lot 72.
Yes.
72.
Another Amsterdam book.
Right. This is Amsterdam 17707. This is the Sfas Emes of Rav Moshe Chagiz. And this sefer it talks all about, it's really an early, maybe one of the earliest ones, of really trying to organize and improve the Chalukah system in Eretz Yisrael. As you know, we mentioned this in the past, and a lot of listeners know this, that especially in the older generations, the community in Eretz Yisrael was completely 100% dependent on charity from Chutz La'aretz, and as the charity came in, that's how they lived. There was no other way to earn any living in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Moshe Chagiz, who comes from Eretz Yisrael, follows Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, one of the important Sephardic Rabbanim there. Rav Moshe Chagiz came to publish his father's Sfarim, and he ends up staying in Hamburg, where he gets very active in a lot of the a lot of the busy controversies of his time, including starting the controversy against the Ramchal. He was the instigator, but he's involved in everything, and he's a confidant of Rabbi Yaakov Emden.
Also, just to jump in the controversies, and I'll get back to you. It's about when the Chacham Tzvi was Rav there for the few years, he got very involved in the Chemi Chayun controversy. There's some lots later in here, and that really was Rav Moshe Chagez and the Chacham Tzvi, and they were with this was the Ashkenazi community, Amsterdam, Sephardi community, Amsterdam, everything erupted. But yeah, back to you.
And in many ways, this did lay the groundwork for a lot of the future rabbinic controversies that would engulf Amsterdam and Western Europe later in the century. But at this particular sefer, the Sfas Emes, which sounds benign enough, talking about how great the Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael is and how much people should how what a privilege it is to support it, but Rabbi Moshe Chagez can't help but also jab the community where he's which he's very dependent on himself, and that's the Amsterdam community, where he jabs them. He says they spend so much money on materialism and other pleasures, and including sinful pleasures of the flesh. But he mentions that they can't spend more money supporting their brethren in Eretz Yisrael. He just puts that line in there, and that really angered the Parnasim of the Kehillah. They felt it was directed at them, and likely it was. So they tumulted against the Sefer, and eventually the Rabbanim of Amsterdam, Shlomo de Oliveira was one of them, and they do come out and they prohibit selling the Sefer in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and it was published in Amsterdam, so that's a fascinating Sefer. Those are like polemics. You could call it a polemic or banned Sefer. So that is Sefer 72, a slender, slim volume. Lot 73 is another beautiful Amsterdam, just for the logo, if nothing else. This is Emunas Udeis in 1648, but what's so fascinating is about this is published by Menashe ben Israel, his press, and has the wandering Jew, so to speak, his logo, his emblem, and so that is Lot 73. Lot 74. Lot 74 is just Lucas Iber, Rafal Hanover. This is, I think I've discussed him elsewhere, and this actually has his signature on it as well. Lot 75, Han Ashir, Emmanuel Chayriki. We've discussed him at length in the past. This is his Chidushim on Mishnah. Just to mention, first of all, there's musical score in here. Emmanuel Chayriki had poems and music. Besides being the Mishnah's Chassid, major Kabbalist, was killed Al Kiddush Hashem. He's buried in a little shtetl in Italy, Cento. He was from Italy, moved to Eretz Yisrael. But what's relevant for Han Ashir is that he discusses he had moved to Eretz Yisrael, and on his way back, he was captured by pirates, and his plan was to call it the Diktuke Anias. And he says that he was told, don't do that. Torah is not ani. You don't call Torah poor. It's not acceptable. And he said, no, he was going to do that. And he said, because of this, the only thing he was ransomed. This is what he was left with. He changed the name to Hain Asher. His name was Riki, rich in Italian. And he said, Taka, you don't call Torah is rich. You don't call Torah poor. And this is all in the introduction. Many of his Sfarim have lengthy introductions, autobiographical, fascinating. And so that is Lot 75. And a lot of them, like Lot 77 is a Medrash Rabbah, Amsterdam 725. You could see the original binding, the wood and leather binding. You see with the clasps, even have, I don't know if listeners have seen, you can check it out with those original, they have the clasps on them. You can check that out. There's some other farmer here also that have that.
Lot 81 and 82 caught my eye. Those are two editions of the Sefer Yosifun. Lot 82 is one in Yiddish, actually, also from Amsterdam in 1661. Sefer Yosifun was wrongly believed for many, many years to be the Sefer written by who we know today as Josephus. It was made sometime in sometimes early times of Rishonim, maybe even earlier. It was an adaptation from Josephus. Josephus wrote his book in Latin, and it was translated into Greek.
Greek, right, yeah. Latin, Greek.
So it was available in Latin and Greek, but it was not available in Hebrew, and Jewish people didn't read it. The Christians read it and used it extensively. It was all, but there was somebody in the times, like I said, in the early times, maybe Goenim/Rishonim, who did adapt it in Hebrew, and somehow he lost the name Yosef ben Matisyahu. His real name it became Yosef ben Gurion, and this sefer was very, very popular. Rishonim who quote Josephus, they're quoting this Sefer Yosifun. This was the main source of history about outside of the Gemara, outside of Talmud. This is the biggest, most important historical source, which was used extensively by Rishonim and by Achronim. Again, it's only in recent generations that we were able to, that the Jewish Sefer reading public was able to read the original Josephus, but otherwise it was Sefer Yosifun, very popular. And again, the Yiddish one in particular is really rare, and it's never been offered at auction before. It's got they've got engravings. Both of them actually have illustrations, really interesting. The other one is from 1771. Lot 81 is the later one from 1771 from Amsterdam, And 82 is the earlier one, the Yiddish one, also from Amsterdam. Really interesting Sfarim.
Right, and Yosifon, I did a podcast on Yosifon at one point, and exactly when Rashi quotes, he quotes Yosifon, he thinks he's quoting Josephus, he's giving, respect to it's Yosifon, again, Yosifon Gurian, something that's extensively quoted. Lot 85 is more history. Amsterdam 1655 is Shevet Yehuda, Rishon ibn Verga, and also together, they also added Megillas Eifa, which is the Shach. The Shach's history of Tachvatat. The Shach also wrote Slichas about Tachvatat. That was actually redone. I'm friends with Anikel Lakewood, Tzvi Rosen. He put out the Slichas and the Megillas Eifa, so that's in the back. And the Shevet Yehuda, actually, this was done. Shevet Yehuda was published through. There was a new edition done, originally republished. A very important work, Shlomo Verga, really about the unfortunate travails that happened to the Jews throughout the centuries. And so this is that is lot 85.
In addition to the travails that happened to Jewry, particularly Spanish Jewry, for which this is the primary source, but it also contains a lot of the records of a lot of the vikuchim, the forced debates that the Jews had to undergo with the Christians. Sometimes they were, more restricted in what they were able to say, sometimes less, but it's a really important historical source, and of course a very well-known and often quoted sefer.
Lot 90 is mixed here with the Amsterdam, even though it's printed in Mantua in 1556. It's Bechinas Olam. They actually call it the other way. We discussed this recently, Gerish Shemayim Larum, which is the other way it's sometimes referred to. But this copy is a copy of the bibliographer and the librarian in Eitz Chaim, David Montezinos. It's actually called the Montezinos Library. Now, the Eitz Chaim is one of the biggest Jewish libraries in the world, oldest in Amsterdam, and so this was his copy. Lot 91 is the Taj Art with the fish skin binding. So I think the recent episode I said it had fish skin. I don't think it's actually fish skin. It looked like fish skin. And what's interesting about these Taj Arts, they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous with the title pages. And if you see them, they come up at auction. They all have different. The quote unquote fish skin binding is different. All the variants are different. Very unique. Interesting binding. This is the first time the Taj was printed. I believe this is 1738. This one has 7 title pages. So they have many title pages in these. And that's a very interesting one. Lot 93, again, I think I should mention before, you have these beautiful bindings. This is a exquisite gold stamp binding. It looks beautiful in the picture. It's Chamisha Tiny, so you can really see some of these. I have a friend who told me really values bindings when you get, and there's a value to them and having really beautiful bindings. So they have really beautiful bindings. There's also another one of these absolutely gorgeous bindings, Lot 95, Tikkun Lel Shana Rabbah. You can see that again. Then jumping ahead, so another one that has the original binding with the clasp is Avak Soifrim, Rabbi Avram ben Levi Kwenki of Chevron, Amsterdam 1704. What's interesting is that Rabbi Yaakov Emden, I believe, in Torah Zeknois, says that he is Sabbatian, and he tells you what a history of Shabbos Tzvi, etc. The catalog here mentions that there's letters to Rav Moshe Zakuto and Rabbi Yehuda Briel and asked about Shabbos Tzvi, but it's hard to say for sure, but you can look at Rabbi Yaakov Emden, you can look at, was he Sabbatian, was he not, did he do tshuva? I think they say, some say he did, so then that's for the Shabbos Tzvi portion of when SfarmChatter did a series on that.
Well, yes, speaking of which, that leads us right into the next bunch of lots here. Lot 101. Lot 101 is the Chuvas Oil Yaakov, an Amsterdam print from 1737. The first edition. There's an offset edition, but this is the first edition of this Chuvas of Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas was the great loichem against the Shabbos Tzvi. Currently, during the rise of the original Shabbos, he was a big fighter. So this is his Chuvas, which are of great interest in for other reasons. We may have mentioned that on an earlier podcast, but it talks a lot about the inner workings of the aforementioned Amsterdam community, particularly the relationship with them and the new returnees from. The Moranos coming back to Judaism and how to relate to them. Do they still get their same status in the community that they deserve, or do they have to be considered and start from the entry level? Different kind of questions that he dealt with, communal levels. And then lot 102, 103, and 104. Actually more, even 105. There's a bunch of these are a bunch of the polemical writings of the Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Rabbi Yonasan Eibshit's fight. 102 is the one written by Rabbi Yonasan. He only fired one salvo, and that was his Luches Edis, in which he collected all the, a great number of Rabbanim, who many of them were younger than him, and maybe have been Talmidim of his. That's a claim that's been aired. But Al Kaponim, this is his the sefer which defends himself. This is the one sefer that he wrote, and the next 3 lots are also part of the controversy, which include these are the ones that Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote, Beis Yohanes and HaSefer in lot 103. Sefer Emes Veloshin Zahiris from 104, which reproduces the Kemeis with the in detail, and Hatzad Nachash which is Tzanach is actually not Rabbi Yaakov Emden. That's the Shabsoi polemic against Nechemia Chayun. So these are very important historical sforim from the era, and their beautiful editions are featured right here.
Just want to go back to Lot 101, which is El Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. First of all, it hasn't been redone. So this is really other than a photo officer, which is terrible, this is really the only one. But this one is missing the Kitzur Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi published in the back. And that is common. It's extremely rare to ever have the Kitzur Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi. It was taken out. There was controversy about it. So the Kitzur was created from Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. Says, no, it's by Rab David Moldola, who worked at the press for many years. Was a Rav, wasn't a rabbinic position, but he was in Amsterdam. And he edited it. And he wrote a foreword. Afterward, he did this in many of his farm. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden reprinted Kitzur Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi, really complained about what happened here in this Kitzur and what was going on here. So in here, it's in this book, this copy, it's missing. But they do, as they state, that what's interestingly about this one, it does contain the indices. As many of them, it doesn't have it. It's destroyed, so it does have a little bit more. But yes, it does. It's normal. You usually find the Sefer's chaser. Why is it chaser? This is common. For El Yaakov, it's very common. This is what happened with the Sefer. And as Ramosha mentioned, there's other polemical works, Nechemia Chayun, etc. Lot 106, by the way, you mentioned Smichas Chachamim. Did you mention Smichas Chachamim? Naftali Katz, famous from Frankfurt. He also was in the Nichayon controversy, and then there's the famous picture of him looking up at the sun and with the fire in Frankfurt. Really, we mentioned him on the podcast on the podcast in the past, but really could do more to discuss him. Lot 107 is a beautiful copy of Beersheva, and they said there's a original parchment binding. And there's the copy of the son of Pnei Yeshua. Lot 108 is what we mentioned. It says in the catalog, first Kuzari printed in England, but it doesn't mean, it's supposed to be Kuzari Sheni. This is Matadon. This is Reb David Nieto, who, by the way, if you haven't seen a picture of him, Google a picture of him just to see. It's amazing. With his goatee and his hat and his hair, or it's probably his wig. And he was a Rav in London. Matadon, he's famous, the one in we talked about this in the past, just briefly. The Chacham Tzvi defended him in the Chuvas, where the community wasn't happy with him. Probably has to do it because they were Sabbatean, and they accused him of being following Spinoza, and the Chacham Tzvi defended him, so etc. Much more to discuss. So this is complete copy. This is actually the Hebrew Spanish edition. There was a couple different variants. That's this one, Lot 108, London, 1714.
Lot 113 is of great historical interest. That is the Chumash used in Prague. Jews who had to go to secular court and had to affirm or swear to the veracity of their statements would have to put their hand on a Chumash, and they used the Jewish Chumash. They wouldn't trust if you put your hand on a secular Bible. They didn't think the Jew would take too much. To take that too seriously, so they had a chumash there, and this chumash is it comes with a little note there, and it's signed by Rebbe Eliezer Fleckels in Latin. He signs it in Laz, I should say, not whatever.
Yeah, not Latin,
but it's not his Hebrew signature. It's what we would call an English signature.
So that's come up. I think there's a bunch of copies of those that come up. Right, Lot 115 is Yaros Dvash, the second edition with his picture, the picture with the svarim behind it, with the big. I don't know how authentic. Some of these that we mentioned before, the Amsterdam ones, those were done in their lifetime. I mean, those were, as far as we know, authentic. And by the way, Amsterdam. Go back to Amsterdam for a minute. That was the painting capital, Rembrandt and others. So those were accurate. Their Renaissance could be. It was. Lot 117, really something I should do an episode on, but that's Binyamin Zev, the Venice 1539, the very first halacha / tshuva sefer printed in the lifetime of its author. Many of these copies have marginal notes and corrections by the Binyamin Zev himself. Meir Ben-Yo published an entire book discussing him. It's a very controversial sefer. Many Rabbanim banned it, burned it, don't use it. And the Rabbanim that quote it, his son-in-law was Mishpatei Shmuel Kalei. So this is, for a different time, but this is a very, very, very important early tshuva sefer. Again, the first one printed in the lifetime
Not
of
only
the
is it
author.
printed in the lifetime, but it carries his name. Like he named the sefer after himself.
Yeah.
The title page is Zeh Sefer Nikra Shmoi B'Yisrael Binyamin Zev, which is his own name. It's an interesting idea.
You can read Meir Ben-Yo's book to get more of a sense of who he was and more about him. So, moving along, they have Lot 123, Lashon Limudim, as I say, the first book of the Ramchal. This is Mantua, 1727. Beautiful copy. What's fascinating to me, we haven't set prices here, right? Because usually, as I've mentioned in the past, the prices change and move along. But just to mention, the bid on this right now is $1,100. What's interesting to me, this is, just interesting to note. Obviously, this podcast is sponsored by Taj Art, but I'm just going to say, when you see a Mesilas Yesharim at auction, they go for $8,000, $10,000. Of course, everyone knows Mesilas Yesharim, but this was the Ramchal's first sefer. For those, many, many people are course, very into and enjoy the Ramchal's farm. This is his first sefer. Why does it have such a low price? It just seems to me odd. So I'm sure it'll end up higher when it comes auction time. So there's a couple of really nice early Italian svarim. There's a Marik, Cremona, 1557, 1558. That's lot 126, an early edition of the Marik. There's actually Ladino Sefer Shulchan Aponim. This is lot 128. Lot 129 is Ber Asik. We've talked about Shuvas Ber Asik. Again, this comes up with the beard and, the Ramifano, etc. So we're not going to go in here. Seder HaYoim is lot 131. That's the first time it had, Moed Ani comes up. Going through, you have Sefer Shirashim with Sefer Aruch, lot 134, Venice 1553. So you have two early Venice Svarim. Lot 135 is something we've mentioned in the past. I don't think we mentioned one of his others from Kol Yaakov. This is Venice 1658. Rabbi Yaakov, a couple Margolis. This is he ran away from Tachvatat. I discussed him in the past. We're not going to go into very moving book where he talks about what happened. His wife and his child were in captivity, and he was trying to find them, and he was publishing this book to raise some money, and he needed to go find them. And, it's again a fascinating work. That's lot 135.
Lot 136 is a very interesting sefer. It's billed as the first magician's guide, printed in Hebrew. That's a little bit of a dramatic way of describing the sefer. It is an interesting sefer, though. It's a small sefer printed in Venice, 1623. It's the first half of the sefer is the famous Tzava of Rebbe Eliezer HaGadol, whether that is, there's a lot of discussion about whether where it came from and when it comes from, but it's been printed in a few editions. That's that's the less interesting part of the sefer. But then in the end, the person who puts out the sefer, Rabbi Yaakov Halperin, he includes a guide for what we'd call parlor tricks. Sleight of hand and how to guess the person's number and how to, the mathematical equation that, you can, you talk to someone and tell them, pick a number in your head and you can get that number down to 9 following a bunch of mathematical equations, different kind of quote unquote magic tricks. But this is just, divrei chachma, he calls it. These are divrei chachma just to impress people or to pass the time. And apparently in 1623, that's something that people wanted. Today, maybe you read this on the back of a cereal box, but this, he took out the time to print it. It's a really, really interesting. I read them. They still work. These tricks still work. How to make an egg rise, fill it with precipitation, and then heat it up. How to get an egg. You can soften an egg so you can squeeze it into a small bottle. Very interesting. A lot of interesting little tricks in there. I was fascinated by it. I read the whole thing.
Listen, this is Italy, Venice, 1623. This is what's going on. And, Italy is a different place on the Republic of Venice. And, for those that know about Italy, I may have been Yavin, but it really tells you about Italian Jewry. Something that we've discussed in the podcast in the past. You really see how Italian Jewry was different. When you hear about the Moshe Provincialo talking about the tennis shuva, about playing tennis on Shabbos, in Eastern Europe, I don't think it was going on. It was just different. They spoke Latin often, Italian and Greek, and they read plays. And I always, come back to Ramosha Zakuto, the big, who was originally from Amsterdam, but it was the major Mekubal, and he wrote Tifta Aruch, and he wrote about the Neshama going through Gehenim. That's Dante. That's Dante's Inferno. Dante was, in Italian. So you really see the Rabbanim, the whole culture in Italy is so different that you have a sefer and it's talking, how do you do sleight of hand tricks?
Which you're right. It shows you that there were, everybody, a lot of mashgichim will tell you there's no word for fun or entertainment in Lashon Kodesh, but and often the Jews didn't have time for it either, but or the ability or the leisure for it. But you're right, and it does tell you at the time that being in a parlor with friends and having to pull out some form of entertainment was important in Venice in the 1623. So that is very, you're right, it's a sign of the times.
Lot 142 is Chanukas Habayis by Ramosha Chayfetz, Moshe Gentili. Otherwise, you have Melechas Machsheves. That's his famous sefer that has a picture of him with the long hair and the galach robes and no yarmulke, and with the yarmulke. This one, though, is Chanukas Habayis, has he made the Beis Hamikdash, and there's the it's not a map, it's kind of a drawing map, whatever you want to call it, of the Beis Hamikdash. This copy has the fold-out map, which is rare. It doesn't always come up in the copy. It's a beautiful copy. That is Venice 1696. That is lot 142. Moving along to some more lots is mentioned lot 146 is a full set of Lavush in the original binding, beautiful binding in beautiful condition. Lot 148 is Teres Chesed from Salonika. This beautiful wide margin. It's just nice just looking at it. I'm just looking at it here on the screen as a really nice copy. Sometimes you see just beautiful copies of Svarim. Lot, moving along to some early Constantinoples, as they call it, early Kushta being Constantinople. There's a bunch of them here. Just to mention them, Lot 149 is a commentary on Megillas Eicha, Rebbe Ibn Shweib, an exile from Spain as a Gerush. Lot 150 is works edited and published by Yitzchak Akrish. And then Lot 151 is a Pirush Megillas Gehalis, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Latif. Lot 152 that I know Ramesha has what to say is an extremely rare sefer. I think they say it was never auctioned. This sefer Michtav Tchia. This is Kusha 1569. So this sefer, what's interesting is this originally was published together with Maimon Tchias HaMesav of the Rambam. So this copy doesn't have it. It's a very interesting book. But there actually was a number of years ago through Bar Ilan University Press a new edition done, and there was two farmed together. Shnei chiburim al Tchias HaMesim. One was Michtav Tchia, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Zabara, this sefer, and another one was Yiklida, I'm going to butcher it, the Tchias HaMesim, Sajib ben Maimon ibn Dinan, a different one. Now, what's interesting about, just to mention Ibn Zabara, so that's all we know from him. We don't know a lot about him. He's a Talmud of the Ra'ah, Rabbi Aaron Halevi, that we know from him. He quotes the Ra'ah, and also. So that's like late 13th century, 14th century. You also know from him that what's interesting about this copy, this is the only time it was printed other than being redone, there are variations of this copy. We know there are variations. It's noted here. It's noted in the new edition. This is, something that you see oftentimes as they would print, as the copies would come off the press, they would make corrections, they would change things. Now, what this sefer is, about Tchias HaMesim, and again, it was printed with the Rambam, so you can imagine this was a Maimonidean type work. I'll turn it to Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon.
Yeah, thank you, Nachi. Okay.
Actually, Moshe Maimon, not Ben Maimon, but yeah.
Ben Benoy.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, very interesting sefer, and it's again, it's maybe also in a way, a sense, it's a sign of the times. But in the 1500s, both in the Jewish world and in the Christian world, and it's been going on for hundreds of years, the study of eschatology was very, very important. It was very important to understand what's happening at the end of time, and that's the Rambam's Igeres Tchias HaMesim. The Rambam, whose opinion still holds sway, and you ask anybody, where do people get their reward? They'll tell you, even small children will tell you that the real reward is in Shemayim. After someone dies, that's where they get. That's where their soul is rewarded. And the Rambam lays this out pretty clearly. And according to the Rambam, it fits into his whole system. His whole, his whole intellectual system about how the reward is really. The reward is for the intellect, not even for the guf. So the question was, already in the Rambam's lifetime, the question was raised. Well, what is the purpose then of Tchias HaMesim, which, as the Gemara, it's one of the Yud Gimel Likum. Already the Mishnah talks about Tchias HaMesim being such an important, fundamental part of our faith. What is the purpose of it? What's the purpose of bringing the dead back to life if life is not the be-all, end-all according to the Rambam? So the Rambam, his answer was not satisfactory to everybody. That they will come back to life, but then they will die again eventually and get their reward in Shemayim. That didn't satisfy. Already the letter didn't satisfy his critics, and the next generation, the Ramban, with all the great respect that he has for the Rambam, but he does pen a whole treatise against the Rambam's opinion, and that's the Shar HaGemul, where he lays out his opinion that they will enjoy their reward in this world after Tchias HaMesim. And when Chazal say Olam Haba, they're referring to the world that will come back when the dead come back to life here in this world. Although the Ramban does not. He doesn't explain exactly why you need a physical existence for this reward, because he himself holds that even the people who come back, they won't need to eat and drink. It'll be like Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, or Eliyahu, or Chanoich. There's certain examples in the Torah where different figures have gone on to become like somewhat angelic and have not needed to eat or drink or do other physical activity, yet they were still in this world. That's what the Ramban says. And what's very important about this particular sefer and this particular study, which did not get, even then, even since it was printed in this early Kushta printed in 1569, it never really got the attention it deserves. And the reason it's so important is because this, as you mentioned, Nachi, this Rabbi Yehuda ibn Zabar is a student of the Ra'ah, and the Ra'ah himself is a student of the Ramban. The Ra'ah himself, in his own Chidushim and Brachas, touches a little bit on the subject, but his views are really treated at length in this particular sefer, which makes it very important for this study of the sheet of Tchias HaMesim, particularly the sheet of the Ra'ah. And the sheet of the Ra'ah, just to summarize it for you in short, it's kedai to learn the sefer. If this is a subject that interests you, very, very important work. And the Shita de Ra'ah is that, like the Ramban, the reward will be here in this world, but not like the Ramban, they won't have a physical existence. The ultimate reward will be as as people eventually slowly morph into spiritual beings here on this world, kind of like Malachim, kind of like what he understands happened to Moshe Rabbeinu and Elio and the others. And it's treated very beautifully, and like I said, I can't say it enough. It's a really, really important sefer for those who are learning the sugya.
Yeah, and this is, again, they say this is the first time that this is offered at auction, so fascinating book. Lot 154 is absolutely beautiful. Just worth looking, this is one of the earliest and most important Kushta prints. I'm just going to read the what they say here in the catalog. Mishnah Torah of the Rambam Kushta, so Constantinople, 1509. And by the way, this starting price of $50,000, 50. Worth seeing. Beautiful bindings, beautiful margins, just beautiful to look at.
Even off prints that they made, they made an off print of the sefer, which is itself a collectible.
Yeah,
this is the original. It's astounding.
Yeah, this is the post Incanabula, so it's right after the Incanabula period ends in 1500. It's in the 1400s. This is the right after, and this is the first edition that includes Sagas Aravid, Hagais Maimonias, and you have also in this one Magid Mishnah. And so there's on Sefer Avav Migdal Oiz. There's other stuff in here. Really fascinating, extremely important edition of Rambam, and that is all 4 volumes. So this is lot 154. Lot 155 is the first edition Masal Shel Rabbi Yamin. This is Kushta 1543, early Constantinople. This is the Binyamin of Tudela. For those that are familiar with his trips and his travels, eventually, the plan is to do a podcast on him. He's fascinating. That's a fascinating read to read about.
We have to mention Lot 157. Lot 157 is a guidebook for Darshanim. It's called Yalkut
Chodesh.
Yalkut Chodesh, and the sefer was printed during Taj Art in 1648, 1649. In Lublin. We're in the epicenter, the ground zero of that terrible, terrible tkufa. So it's an amazing for a sefer to have survived. The Jewish communities did not survive. The Jewish buildings did not survive. The Jews themselves barely survived. And for a sefer to survive is incredible. It's also a very interesting sefer where this is like a handbook for Darshanim. The Magidim would travel around, and they can, and it shows you also, again, it shows you what was important to them at the time. There's a lot of Kabbalah in the Sefer. This is this is what a Darshan would talk. This is what he would use. There's a lot of Tikkunei Zoyar. There's a Yoines Elam from the Ramami Pano, which is a Kabbalist Sefer Kavonis. The Asar Mamoris from Ramami Pano. The Galia Razia. A lot of Kabbalistic form. That was the bread and butter of a Darshan in Poland during the time of Tachvatat.
Lot 161 is a Pirish on Medrash Rabbah. They say that this was never sold before. It's Krakow 1569. Raftali Hertz B'Menachem of Lemberg. There's really a beautiful printer's mark here. It has like a horse or is it a unicorn? It's surrounded by a thing. It's really, very, very nice to see. If those interested, again, this is audio, not visual, but if you want to see, check out Lot 161, the picture of the printer's mark. There's actually, I think there's a book, maybe Yari or someone wrote a book about printer's marks. You can read that more about, early printers had their specific mark. There's some early Krakow's farm. Lot 162 is Pirkei Avos Hadasha. This is Krakow 1576. There's the Talmud Bavli Masechta Soita, Krakow 1604. There's some other, you can find some interesting Krakow's farm. There's an early Gemara from Basel. That's Masechtas Nida. 1580s from the Valmadano Trust. Valmadano Library, famous library. That's Lot 164, a beautiful copy. The first sefer of the Marsha on Masechtas Yomtiv and Yevamis. So Beitza, Beya, that's his one. Then they have early copies of Minhagim. So you have the Riva de Trento copy of the Minhagim of the Maril and Rabbi Isaac Tirna. Isaac Tirna's the Minhagim are very important for Ashkenazim, and many people don't even. And Mechon Yerushalayim, we did it beautifully in Torah, but many people don't know. I think aren't familiar that a lot of our halakha, Minhagim, Ramah, a lot of things come from there or the Maril. So that's a very important sefer.
It's the bedrock of Ashkenazi. The Ramah's. The Ramah's contribution to the Shulchan Aruch was, to introduce the Minhagim of Ashkenaz, and the Minhagim of Ashkenaz rely almost entirely. I mean, they're expounded upon, but the basis, the bedrock of Ashkenazi Minhagim are these early Sefer Minhagim. There's a couple different editions here. All of them have different. There's an illustrated one that goes in the Seder of the Year. Very interesting items. It's a lot 166 and 167.
Yeah, 167 is really beautiful. There's many, many woodcuts, beautiful illustrations. It's a miniature also. And you can look at that one over there. There's a copy of Teres Oila from Prague. That's 169. Lot 170 jumped out to me. Something amazing. This Lot 170 is Noda B'Yehuda Tinyana, Prague 1811. It's the personal copy of Rabbi Shmuel Landau, the Noda B'Yehuda's son, is what they say.
And Shmuel Landau is the one who put the sefer out.
Another one that I'm going to mention the price, leading bid of $1,600. Not leading bid of $1,600. He's the publisher. He's the one who compiled and put together Noda B'Yehuda. So this has his signature, amongst others, on this copy of Noda B'Yehuda. Lot 171, Sefer Zechronos, that was Shmuel Mavuav. There's a Haggadah, Lot 172. Offenbach Haggadah. Yiddish translation has many wood cuts. This was common. You would have wood cuts on many old Haggadahs. Pictures. Today you have comic books is all the rage, but this was essentially what it was back then. Lot 172, Imre Bina, a Kabbalistic commentary on Chad Gadya Altena, 1779. It has a stamp of the Klois in Altena. Klois, again, we mentioned recently, is like a koil. Lot 174, Beit Chayrin Haggadah. This is another Haggadah with, again, elaborate pictures. That's worth mentioning as well. There's another Haggadah Mordechai. This is printed in Amsterdam, 1764. So this is a real commentary that's on the Haggadah. This has the lion on the title page from the Zussman's family that printed for many years. The first Haggadah printed in Eretz Yisrael, that is printed in 1842. This is Lot 177.
Which is 1 year after Rabbi Yisrael Bach, the publisher, established the printing press. He reestablished it in Yerushalayim. It's known to be a beautiful printing press. It's rare. It's chashuv. Rabbi Yisrael Bach himself was one of the leading Hasidic Rebbes. He was born in Berditchev, and his prints are highly sought after. This first Haggadah is a very, very rare item and a beautiful Haggadah from Yerushalayim, 1842.
Chidah Sfarim, we mentioned the Chidah earlier, so Lot 179, we have Mara Be'etzba, it's Purin Shamir, Kesher Gadol, Kavachas. This is printed in Livorno, 1802. The Chidah's living in Livorno. The Chidah this is the original binding. The Chidah, I don't know if he's involved in this copy, but he was involved in these. Another book, Vash Lafi, this is Livorno, 1801, also in the lifetime of the Chidah. So, those come up, but it's fascinating to see a copy, original Chidah's signature. Of course, many farms, and no signature here, but this is in the Chidah's lifetime. Moving forward to some other items, much anything else that jumped out to you?
I like these Sephardic Machzer in Lot 190. It has it's again from Amsterdam. It's a rare sitter with a Spanish translation, which is likely Spanish Portuguese translation for the Amsterdam community. It's the beautiful Machzer.
So yeah, they used to speak many languages. They spoke Hebrew, and they also spoke Spanish. Was like the English. Even though they live in Holland, eventually they spoke Dutch, and it was Spanish, and then in Portuguese. I don't remember. One of them was like the vernacular. One was like the Kaddish. It was almost like in Italy you had Latin and Italian, but they also spoke Hebrew. They spoke a bunch of different languages. So this has the Spanish translation. That Machzer, as you mentioned, is Lot 190. There's this is the Machzer section. So there's Lot 191 is a Machzer Minig Roimo. It's printed in Venice, 1710. So you have it's kind of they call it's Minig Rome, but it's the Italian nusach.
Well, Rome refers. I think we mentioned this before also, but Rome refers to the pre. When the world became polarized between Ashkenaz and Sfarad, Rome became the name for the earlier communities that date back to the Roman Empire, and it means one thing in Constantinople, where the Romaniotes where you were there before the Girish Sfarad got there, and it means another thing in Italy also before the development of the Italianism. It's like the old Italianism, the pre-Italianism.
So there's a woman's Yiddish siddur, that's Lot 198, that was printed in Amsterdam 1730, and then of course Lot 199, how could you have an auction without some beautiful Chassidish Svarim, Slavita, that's when you get into Slavita press, wide margins on blue paper, Lot 202, Tikkune Zoyar, you have printed in Slavita, of course with the red, Slavita on the title page, then we have some Zhitomer, Lot 203, and so on. So of course you have some Chassidish Svarim, as we mentioned, we've discussed a little bit, because it's more. So there's a bunch of Chassidish Sfarim.
One of them in particular, very interesting, is the Lot 215 is the Netzer Chesed and Adam Yasher of Kamarna. Kamarna is very Kabbalistic. I mean, all Chassidim are into Kabbalah, but the Kamarna was particularly so into Zohar and into Kabbalah, into Skulis, into practical Kabbalah. And this sefer in particular, which is rare, is it's considered a major skula. It has the yad in it, which it says here. Whoever carries this amulet will not fear from any dever v'cherev. Very important and rare Chassidish sefer.
And this was at the end of the book, so you can imagine that's what the amulet said, and it was written by the Kamarna. What do you think happened? Everybody ripped it out. So this is a full copy with it in there, and this has a leading bid of $15,000, Lot 215. You can take a look and check it out. There's a Ksav Yad. They have a manuscript, say for Imre Shefer of Toli Robshitz, and this was printed in 1884. And so this is they have a manuscript of it. You can see it here, Lot 217. There's some signatures. Lot 218 is Reb David Lelov. They have a signature of him. They have some other. They have a Lot 220 is interesting. It's the ksuba of, they say, a ksuba of Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld from his second marriage. So they have the ksuba itself, which is interesting. She was 30 years younger than him. And she passed away in 1958 at the age of 90. So this has her, this is the ksuba. If you want to know, it's interesting, ksuba of a row. What's going on? This is from his second marriage. You can check out the ksuba. You see ksubas come up at auction. I don't know. What do you do with such a ksuba? Do you buy it? Do you display it? Look at Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld's ksuba. It's a pretty fascinating item.
It is.
So Lot 222, Reishis Chachma, and it's the copy of the Rugas Haboisem. So that's Lot 222. It's a Munkach in late 19th century, so it's a late copy, but of course the signature, the pedigree. Lot 223. It's fascinating for a couple of reasons. I think we discussed that. This is Besamim Rosh, we mentioned earlier, Seoul, Berlin. He claimed that it was a rush, but there's a signature on here, and they say that it's the only known signature of Rabbi Leib Tzins, the Maral Tzins, the OG Segula rabbi, if you will, for the Svarim. I know today it's Sarah Shimshin, but the Rabbi Leib Tzins, it says it on his kever, that if you print the Svarim and he promises to help you. So this has his signature on this copy of Besamim Rosh. And first of all, it's supposed to show you also, historically, you can see from a signature, he was learning Besamim Rosh. Everybody, Besamim Rosh was something that all the Rabbanim dealt with, whether they came down that it's, forged, or Mochabanet, and those outside, the Chidah, I think we liked it. There's different sides. You could look at Chamavadia, talks about it in his Chuvas today, if you want to look more on it. And the new Besamim Rosh, there's a whole piece on it. I think we've discussed this in the past, but this is, so again, it's a Besamim Rosh with the copy of with the signature, of the Maral Tzins. Then we get to Guf Halachos, Izmir 1675, with the copy and the glosses of the Baruch Tam. Baruch Tam wrote many glosses on many different things. So there's that.
Lot 228 jumps out at me. It's the personal Mesilas Yesharim of Reb Shlomo Zalman.
You see how worn it is? You see how worn the Mesilas Yesharim of Reb Shlomo Zalman is?
Yes, a very, very well-used copy. Reb Shlomo Zalman, besides for his greatness in Torah, was also one of the most outstanding personalities. Why, in his tzidkus and his humility and his midas tovos, outstanding. He got a lot in that regard as well. And this is the early seeds are his very well-worn copy of Mesilas Yesharim.
Lot 230, as they call it, unknown treasure, is really an extremely important and fascinating discovery, an item, which is written in the beautiful handwriting, the Sephardic handwriting of the Ben Ish Chai, and they say it's the only haskam, more like Michtav Bracha of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai, for reasons, they say didn't like to write. I'll let you talk more about this. This is your forte, the Sephardi part of the world, but this was written for Hama-Asif, and as we'll talk about, the Ben Ish Chai wrote in many journals. He contributed. He read journals clearly, and I think Avat Shalom published recently, I think Hoyd Yosef, I think it's called, Chuvas, and they pulled out his halachic responsa that he wrote into these journals. He was very involved and very busy with journals. So this is something that he wrote a haskama and michtav bracha on a journal, something rare thing that he did. And I'll let you talk and tell the listeners a little bit more why this is so rare and what's so unique about this.
Well, first of all, this, like you said, it's somewhat of a michtav bracha, which is why we even have it. The Ben Ish Chai would not write haskamas because his father and grandfather both died the year that they gave a haskama. And to him, that was enough of a chazaka. That's a sakana. He didn't want to write any haskamas. Everybody, he was the Gadol Hadar in the Sephardic world, and very well known in the Ashkenazic world as well. Partially because of that, his writings in the journals, which we'll get to soon. But very sought after. But he would not grant the haskama to anybody because of that. For that very reason, this, I guess, because the Michtav Bracha, which again, it's still very rare. We don't know of any others like it, but that's probably why he permitted himself to write this during his lifetime. He wrote a Michtav Bracha for Rabbi Zion Kuinka for the aforementioned Hama-Asif. What is Hama-Asif? Hama-Asif was a very ambitious rabbinic journal published in Yerushalayim by Rabbi Zion Kuinka, a very prominent rabbi in Yerushalayim, a Sephardic rabbi. But Hama-Asif, like the name suggests, he was going to bring together, through the intellectual exercise and the study of Torah, he was going to bring together all the different disparate Jewish communities and into one under one roof. And there's a Hama-Asif. It's a very, very chashuv journal. It spanned about 20 years or so. It ran, and this journal would have submissions from Rabbanim all across the spectrum. Rabbanim in Poland, Rabbanim in Baghdad, the Ben Ish Chai, who contribute a lot to the journal, and And that, like you said, the Hoid Yosef that Avat Shalom put out, they put it out a long time ago and they just reissued it. But it's a whole sefer just from the Ben Ish Chai's submissions to such journals, prominently Hama'asif. They say where each shtickle comes from. You can see a lot of them are from this Hama'asif. And so that's why the Ben Ish Chai prints this. He writes this Michtav Bracha to help raise money for this venture, which he held very strongly. And but however, Rabbi Tzin Kowinka was even more sensitive to this sensitivity of the Ben Ish Chai, and he himself never published it. In the early editions of Hama'asif, the journal would carry letters of approbation from different Rabbanim, but he never published this one from the Ben Ish Chai, probably out of that same sensitivity of the Ben Ish Chai. So perhaps maybe you could even suggest the Ben Ish Chai told him, wait until I'm not here anymore, then you can publish it. But he did not publish it even after 1909 when the Ben Ish Chai passed away. So it's an interesting item. It's a beautiful letter, very beautiful. Heaps praise on. Maybe it's more likely that it's humility. It strikes me now, Nachi, that Rabbi Tzin Kowinka, because he's praised so mightily in this letter, he probably didn't want to, out of his own humility, did not publish the letter. Be that as it may, it is very interesting, the Ben Ish Chai's involvement in journals. I once passed around, you and I worked on some sleuthing we did in the background for a story the Ben Ish Chai writes in his drushes. The Ben Ish Chai writes, he said he names a certain journal where he saw a very interesting story. Just the story in brief. It's reprinted in Apples of Gold or some other.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called, by Art Scroll. Yeah,
it's a collection of the parables of the Ben Ish Chai. They recreate the story, which is a fascinating story. The story basically is about someone who wakes up on Rosh Hashanah with the firm resolve that he's done with sheker, he's done with falsehood, he's done with lying. Now he's committed 100% to the truth, and then as he's he's formulating this commitment, some ugly creature appears to him, and the creature identifies himself as sheker. I'm the one that you want to do without. And he says, of course I want to do without you. And the creature tells him, listen, I'll give you a shot at it, but there's no backsies, no tracksies. You're going to live without sheker. You're going to regret it. No, I won't regret it, of course. And the story goes on to say how just one encounter after the next on that very day, which by the way is Rosh Hashanah, but he's running into this person and that person, all the people in his life, business associates and family members and fiance, each and every one of them, because he's so committed to saying the truth, he can't help himself, and he utters things which he should not be uttering, and he alienates them all. And by the end of the day, he's broken and distraught because he's ruined his whole life because there's no sheker. And then this creature comes back and says it was just a dream, and now you can go back living your life. With the moral of the story being, and this is what the Ben Ish Chai uses it for, that to live on this world, sheker is a necessity. Obviously used correctly, used according to the dictates of Emes and the dictates of Toiv and Yashar. It's a whole discussion, but that's the Ben Ish Chai's point. And the Ben Ish Chai identifies the source for the story as a certain journal. I think it's the Gan Shashuim or something like that. I forget the exact name now, but I did go and track it down today. You can find all these old journals, and it was very interesting to me that the journal was not Hama'asif, not a Torah journal, but something a lot more maskilik, for lack of a better word. And a lot of submissions, they were very, openly Haskalah. This is just Hebrew prose and Hebrew writing, which was a hallmark of the Haskalah, the Wissenschaft era. But so the Ben Ish Chai apparently subscribed and read all these journals, which contributes to his own very broad worldview, which underscores an interesting facet of the Ben Ish Chai, which is sometimes overlooked. The Ben Ish Chai, of course, is part of the very, very ultra traditional camp. But this camp, particularly in Baghdad, is much more open to modernity and Hebrew writing and poetry than you would find in other similar, really ultra right-wing camps. Just another example from after the generation after the Ben Ish Chai, the chief rabbi of Baghdad is Reb Ezra Dangor. Reb Ezra Dangor's farm, he has a sefer on Chumash that was published by Mechayim Shalayim. You don't see it around very much anymore. But in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, Reb Ezra, very traditional of the Baghdad community, writes, I'm gonna share with you a piece from HaChacham Shadal, he says, about the origin of Karbanis, just to help the reader understand. It's like you wouldn't expect that in a regular series. But again, they were very thirsty for knowledge, and again, probably because Haskalah didn't carry with it the danger and the threat of undermining their community, because their community was so otherwise insular, that these things was not taboo at all. And the Ben Ish Chai, avid reader and of course intellectually extremely curious, would read and participate in these journals, with Hama'asif, with the Torah journal being a particular favorite of his, and that's why this makes this Haskama, this Michtav Bracha, so unique, a really original item, and that, like you said, it's lot 230.
Yeah, and it has a bid of $11,000 because although many things in the Ben Ish Chai come up, this is so rare. They actually say that it's not known in the biographies of the Ben Ish Chai and it's not quoted. So a very interesting work, and you can check it out and you can read a lot of it at lot 230. And again, for everything, the link will be on, and to check out the catalog will be in the show's notes. It'll be on the WhatsApp community, so you can go and check out anything they want to check out. What else jumped out to you, Moshe, as we near the end?
Lot 231. Very interesting. It's a full sefer in manuscript. It's a rear sefer. It's the laws of Gittin and Chalitza. Part of it, I think, was published, the Gittin part, but maybe a different edition. This is it's a very important sefer for a Rav to do Gittin and Chalitza. This is his whole sefer in manuscript form. Included with is a small notebook by someone who studied it. So it comes with a provenance, a very important and rare sefer. What's the dating on this one, Nachi? They estimate that it's back all the way as old as 1551. Very you don't see a lot of these for sale anymore. A very, very rare and chashuv item.
Yeah, I think some of the sefer, at least some of it, is in Mechon Yerushalayim, printed some of it, I think, just going off memory. I'm not sure. Yeah, and there's some other really nice, beautiful manuscripts. You see about 234, the Ashkenazi manuscript of Sefer Eitz Chaim, Reb Chaim Vital. They say apparently from the 18th century. Lot Songs and Poems in Italy, beautiful manuscript, a really nice decorated title page is lot 235, Italy, 1776. A manuscript of prayers and laments from Fez, 19th century. That's lot 236. There's Shalos Shuvas by the Rabbanim of Meknes, 1862. That's lot 237. You better be able to read the Moroccan Ksav if you're going to buy that. Lot 238 from Toledano, another Meknes, another Moroccan 19th century. That's lot 238.
There's a lot of value in these because they're lesser known and sometimes they're hard to read. So people are not onto them, so to speak, as much as they may be on the other ones. Some of these are very old, very important, well-known Rabbanim. Like for example, lot 244 is it's from Tunis. In the early 18th century, 1700, 1740, signed by early Rabbanim in Tunis. Very, people can't read it as easily, so they may be overlooked, but there's a lot of value there. I should have mentioned also lot 243, we spoke about him not too long ago, is the Rabbi Shayahu Basan, the Rebbe of the Ramchal. Here's a full tshuva in his handwriting. It's rare to have a full tshuva like that in his own handwriting. I think this one is published, but here is the original. It's a rare item.
Yeah, really nice Italian it's Hebrew, but Italian Ksav, different. The Ksav varied depending on where you live. So that's lot 243. Moving along as we get to the end of the auction, there's some other, again, Moroccan, really beautiful signatures. You can check out all the various ones. There's a Yemenite Esther scroll, lot 247. So then you get some Megillas Esther. You have a couple of Megillas here. You have some autographed kuntras of Chidushim by the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. That's lot 251. Menachem Mendel of Shklov, a manuscript, is lot 252. This is a letter of the Shalom Rabbi Yosef Shalom Nathan says the Shalom Meshiv. That's lot 253. Rashashval Hirsch, you have a handwritten essay. That's lot 254. The Shurim of Cheskel Sarna. That's lot 255. And then there's a letter written by Rav Shach about related to the publishing of Avi Ezri. That's lot 256,
which is a personal letter that he wrote to his friend. There's not a lot of those from Rav Shach, but this is unique. It is. There's one here.
And then there's a letter from Moshe Feinstein, lot 258. They said about a kashrus polemic in Pittsburgh to Reb Zev Wolf Leiter. This is 1965. And then there's a dollar bill with a letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There's one of those, the Shana Tova greeting. That's like 259. There's one that's 260. They say they got the dollar bill from the Rebbe. I guess it has a paper. I was saying, how do you know when they always put these dollar bills? How do you know that dollar bill is really from the Rebbe? So there's one, and then there's a Shana Tova letter by the Rayatz of Lubavitch, is lot 261. So really a very large, varied auction with many different items. And as we said, the first part of this auction, the first 64 lots, is Judaica, which we didn't even get into. So you can check that out. And again, the auction is going to take place Monday, November 25th. This part that we just discussed, part 2, Rabbinical Letters, Rare Books, and Manuscripts, is starting at 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time. There'll be a link in the show's notes. Again, in the WhatsApp community. Check it out. Look at the catalog. And thank you to Taj Art for sponsoring the episode. And as always, if anybody has feedback, comments, what they like, what they don't like about the auction podcast specifically, please, if you're on the WhatsApp community, you see my number, you can message me there, or you can email me. However, get in touch with me. And if you have a commentary for Moshe, I'll pass it along to him. You can reach out and give feedback. And so Again, thank you to Taj Art, and thank you very much for joining me once again.
My pleasure, Nachi. This is a lot of fun to go through this catalog, a lot of fun to learn about a lot of these farms, very varied and interesting and historical chashiv auction.